Okay, guys, let's spend just a minute or three talking about wireless attacks and some of the techniques that are sort of just used on only wireless attacks. Wireless security is going to be a little bit different because, unlike any sort of wired security, it's going to be a lot easier for people to tap into what everybody else is doing. So there's a sort of a unique set of challenges here. It's a little bit harder to do on a wired access unless you're able to get access to a router or some other piece of network equipment, and even then, you're probably not looking at everything. So, anyway, wireless attacks. If you have ever wandered around uh, an airport or any other place where there's large numbers of people, you may have seen somebody trying to construct what's referred to as an evil twin. Um, what these are going to look like is if somebody uses their laptop, I think typically, to generate an access point that looks like a public Wi-Fi sort of point, then the idea here would be that somebody would connect to this fake access point, and it may even actually connect to the internet. But you would be able to look at all the traffic that's going back and forth. So if somebody is able to connect to an evil twin and then they type in their bank password or something, this would be a good way of compromising their information. The book talks about karma attacks. Karma is a device that will listen for Wi-Fi sort of requests and then respond. And if you're doing something that is a karma attack, this is a man in the middle attack. It's just sort of the wireless equivalent of a man in the middle attack. And once you're in this position, either using an evil twin or a karma attack, there are ways that you could sort of force the computers that are using these things to downgrade a protocol that's easier to listen to. And we've talked about the same concept can be used on wired networks. We talked about this in the first video for this chapter, but there's ways you can do this with wireless access points and wireless attacks as well. So that's sort of what that does. So let's go. Let's see, where are we? Okay, so there's the book lists sort of a couple of the tools that can be used for wireless security. I'm not sure there's necessarily an enormous advantage of going over this in detail. Just be aware that those are tools that exist and that are out there. And that's about all we need to say for at least that particular type of. Well, no, actually, the book doesn't have a slide for this, but there's another product out there called WPS. And this is a way to set up Wi-Fi devices. If you've ever done this, where you get a wireless printer connected and you just have to push one button in order to get it set up, you've been using WPS. WPS is something that the security problems are fairly well known at this point, but it's popular because it's really easy to use. And be aware that that's something that can be a vulnerability, and that's about all we need to say about that. Now, if you've used Bluetooth on, I think most of you probably are more phone savvy than I am, so Bluetooth is probably something that you're pretty familiar with. And there's two main ways that Bluetooth can be attacked. They're listed here. Blue snarfing is when you're able to sort of swipe information from a device that's using Bluetooth, and blue jacking is going to send a bunch of unsolicited messages, spam for Bluetooth, basically. There's a couple other things that we can talk about here. One of these things is called RFID, and so if you've probably used RFID products in the past, even if this is something that you're not aware of. If you have a badge that you can that after you get it close to a sensor, it'll beep and let you in. That badge probably has an RFID tag in it. They've been used some in Amazon's sort of grocery store of the future, where you can just go and walk in and put stuff in your bag and walk out, and you automatically get charged. That's using an RFID tag. There are some ways that you can, if you have the right equipment, you can clone RFID tags, and that's something that is a potential security problem if you're using that to restrict access to an area. Um, but that's I think probably the big thing to be aware about there. There's two other concepts that the book talks about here, but there's not a slide for them. One of them is jamming, and this idea is, and I think if you've ever watched any sort of military movie where there's a scene where they're jamming radar. This is fundamentally the same concept, even though it doesn't necessarily look like that. Where you're sort of flooding that bandwidth with garbage information. That's a way that you could use to prevent something that should be happening from happening. For example, let's say if I've got a um, a wireless sensor in my window that's supposed to alert the security system in my house when somebody breaks the window. If you know that that's how that reports, you could go use sort of do an attempt to do a denial of service attack or jamming that frequency, and then if you break the window, that sensor can't report because all anybody that's listening on that frequency is going to hear is garbage. That's something that's not a particularly common technique, but it could be used in as a way to try to get past certain things. That really becomes a little bit more important when you're talking about the Internet of Things. Now, when you're talking about DOS attacks, even though that's a type of wireless DOS attack, a lot of times DOS attacks are not something that's authorized given the scope of a lot of penetration tests. A lot of companies are not going to want you to get in their network and do DOS attacks on the equipment that they have because they know that it's going to disrupt their business. And so being told that this would disrupt their business by actually disrupting their business isn't sort of additional useful information that they would need. So and be aware, as a general rule, with DOS attacks, you should probably be sure exactly what's allowed and what's not allowed. The last concept here that's talked about, again specifically for wireless networks, is what's referred to as repeating. And if you could install a repeater, the main value here is that if you were trying to access a wireless network, you have to be in the right geographic point. They don't have a large range, at least not if people are paying attention to security. And if you're sitting right outside the building after hours, this might attract the attention of a security guard. If you can put a repeater on the wireless network somewhere, this has the ability to boost that signal to somewhere else or to transmit it sort of in a different way, and it would allow you to access that the information that's on that network from somewhere beyond the limits of where the wireless would typically be accessible. That's why that's valuable. There's not really an analogy for that for wired networks, at least not specifically, and that is about all we need to say about wireless networks. So that is it for this chapter.